Okay, so this is what we're talking about, and I have a lot to talk about, and I'll be going through a lot of these slides very quickly. Let me say, it's a great pleasure to be here with so many distinguished scientists presenting today. Okay, now, U.S. and international safety guidelines are based on only thermal heating effects. But there are many non-thermal effects that occur at levels orders of magnitude lower than those allowed by the guidelines. And what I'm going to talk about here are a series of 8 effects that where there are large numbers of published reviews on lowered fertility caused by various kinds of changes, neurological, neuropsychiatric effects, also producing quite a number of changes. Cellular DNA damage of 3 types. 13 reviews on programmed cell death, apoptosis. Oxidative stress, free radical damage. 19 reviews on that. You get a variety of different endocrine, that is hormonal effects. 12 different reviews have been published on these. Excessive intracellular calcium, 15 reviews on that. This is the cause of almost everything else that I'm going to be talking about. And 35 reviews on cancer, published all the way from the 1970s up until the present. Pulsed EMFs, EMFs that pulse up and downs, as has been already discussed, are in most cases much more biologically active than non-pulsed or continuous wave EMFs. There are 13 reviews on that. Because all wireless communication devices communicate via pulsations, they are potentially, and I believe actually, much more dangerous. There are 28 different studies that have shown that various kinds of non-thermal effects of microwave and also other frequency EMFs can be blocked by or greatly lowered by using calcium channel blockers. These are drugs that are specific for blocking what are called voltage-gated calcium channels. I'll often abbreviate those VGCCs. And there are 5 different types of calcium channel blockers that have been used in these studies, each having a distinct structure, each binding to a different site. The only thing that is known or even postulated about these that are in common is they all block these channels. And so when you find these effects blocked or greatly lowered, that tells you something very profound, namely that the EMFs are activating via VGCC activation and allowing calciums to flow into the cell. So these are channels in the plasma membrane that surround all of our cells, and such that when they open, you get a huge amount of calcium flowing into the cell. Why? Because there's a 10,000-fold concentration gradient driving calcium into the cell, and there's actually over a 1,000,000-fold electrochemical gradient driving calcium into the cell. So you open these channels, whoosh, you get huge amounts of calcium going in. Normally that only happens for very short time periods in order to regulate things, but when you overactivate these with the EMFs, all hell breaks loose. And that's basically, I think, where we are. Now, there are also, let me just say, there are also other voltage-gated ion channels that are activated. The primary effects seem to go through calcium. There are some effects, however, that are produced by the other channels as well. We have now evidence for 8 different channels, each of which has a similar voltage sensor that controls the opening of the channel, and each of which are activated via the EMFs. And so, and I'll argue that that the voltage sensor is the primary direct target of the EMFs. Why is the voltage sensor so sensitive to these EMFs? This is a model of the voltage sensor, and let me just say this is produced by a professor in the UK. What you can see here is that these channels, these voltage-gated calcium channels, are made up of 4 different very similar domains. This one, this one, this one, and this one. And they actually wrap around each other, sort of into a cylinder. That's not what's shown here. And these blue and orange colored cylinders are alpha helices. So this is a structure in the protein. And the reason that they're colored differently is because this orange one has a bunch of positive charges on it, plus, 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 etc. There are 5 positive charges in each of those. Those 4 helices are collectively the voltage sensor. And those 4 helices are all tilted in the membrane, and that's very important because what it means is all these charges are within actually the lipid part of the membrane, the fatty part of the membrane. That's very important for 2 reasons. One is that the forces on those charges is inversely proportional to the dielectric constant of the medium they're in. The dielectric constant of this fatty part of the membrane is about 1/120th of the dielectric constant of the aqueous parts of the cell in our body. So this is aqueous, that's aqueous. The forces are about 120 times stronger because these things are within this lipid environment. Secondly, there's another thing that's going on here. And so these factors mean that the forces are much greater because they're 20 charges, not just 1. So you got lots of charges. They're 120 times stronger because of this Coulomb's law, dielectric constant. And then there's another factor that's even larger, approximately 3,000-fold factor, because the plasma membrane has a very high electrical resistance, and whereas the aqueous phase has high conductivity, and therefore the electrical gradients are highly amplified right across the plasma membrane. This comes out of Ohm's law. So we're talking about old laws of physics, okay? We're talking about Coulomb's law that was first stated in 1784, and Ohm's law that dates from the 1830s, right? So all old physics turns out to be extremely important here because of the approximately 7.2 million times stronger than the forces on singly electrically charged groups in the aqueous parts of the cell. The safety guidelines are allowing us to be exposed to levels that are something like 7.2 million times too high. Now, how does it work? How do you get these effects? We've got microwave and lower frequency EMFs acting via VGCC activation, producing excessive calcium in the cell. And there are 2 main pathways that are involved in producing the pathophysiological effects. One is that when you have excessive calcium, you get excessive calcium signaling. Calcium signaling is extremely important in every single eukaryotic cell on the planet, including every single animal cell, every single plant cell, etc. And so when you get excessive calcium signaling, you got lots of problems. Those are very important here. In addition, excessive calcium here produces high levels of nitric oxide and superoxide. These 2 react with each other to form peroxynitrite, which is a potent oxidant. Peroxynitrite then breaks down to form reactive free radicals, and they produce oxidative stress, and they activate NF-kappa B. So you get inflammation, you get oxidative stress, you get free radical damage. Free radical damage, by the way, is the mechanism that produces the DNA effects. Okay, so you get each of the DNA effects that have been discussed through the free radical attacks on the DNA. Okay, now I want to say I think this has already been discussed, so I'll just say there are 4 reasons why EMFs are more active in children than in adults: higher surface to volume ratio, higher density of stem cells. The younger you are, the higher the density. Stem cells are very, very sensitive to these EMFs. The developing brain appears to be especially sensitive. I'll talk briefly about that later. And the tissues in young individuals have higher water content. That basically means that the EMFs penetrate more effectively into those tissues to produce effects. Quite a number of these effects, based on the best available evidence, are cumulative. That is, when you have long or repeated exposures to a particular type and level of EMF, the effects become more and more severe with time. just the same exposures, just longer times. And as they become more severe, they apparently become irreversible. This is therefore producing absolutely horrendous situations. And so I think, and I really don't have time to discuss this, we are facing 3 existential threats that are imminent in all technologically advanced societies, and there are probably others as well. One is a crash in our collective brain function. A second is a crash in our reproductive function. And I use that term crash advisedly. And a third is the possible impacts of these EMFs on our gene pool because of the mutations that occur in germline cells that we know occur. We know the DNA effects occur in germline cells, and we know these DNA effects can produce mutations. I estimate that it's probably something like 5 to 7 years until we see a crash in our collective brain function, in which case my prediction is we're going to go into utter chaos. Basically, Wi-Fi produces 7 of the 8 effects that we discussed before, plus a number of other effects. And so Wi-Fi is a serious threat to human health. And okay, let's talk about 5G. The idea behind 5G is, first of all, to use much higher frequencies, what are called millimeter wave frequencies. And the reason that the industry wants to go to these millimeter wave frequencies is because the much higher frequency that is there will allow them to use much higher pulsations and therefore communicate much more information per unit time. So that we're talking about extraordinary levels of pulsation and therefore, at least potentially, and I think actually, extraordinary biological effects. In addition to that, this millimeter wave frequencies have the property that they're highly absorbed by materials. Now, these things, the way these things get absorbed predominantly is by interacting with charge groups. So it's reasonable then to predict that the 5G frequencies will involve high levels of activation of the voltage sensor, because that's the way it works, through interaction with charge groups. In a small organism, insects, small mammals, and birds will be much more impacted than we will. Plants, where the EMFs work very similarly to the way they work in our bodies, will also be heavily impacted. Even large trees, their leaves and their reproductive organs are highly exposed. So they will be highly impacted. I predict that there will be absolute ecological disasters from this, that we'll have whole ecosystem collapses because of the effects on a variety of different animals and plants. The current plan, already approved by the FCC and the Congress in the US, to put out tens of millions of 5G antenna without doing one single biological safety test. Europe and East Asia seem to be following similar paths. This, in my view, is absolute insanity. Thank you very much.